During the first hours of loading and departure of the giant cruise ship Adora Mediterranea, most of its Chinese passengers were very excited for their trip aboard the massive vessel, which can carry over 2,000 passengers and cost $400 million to build. One of the destinations passengers were most excited about was Miyako Island, the largest island in the Miyako Islands group, which belongs to Japan's Okinawa Prefecture and one of Japan's most beautiful islands. Generally, the island boasts a wonderful tropical climate, and its pristine beach waters are incredibly pure. Its natural beauty resembles that of the Maldives. The Chinese make up a quarter of Japan's foreign visitors annually and contributed more than a quarter of the tourism spending in Japan from July to last September. And we'll soon learn about the massive impact the Chinese have on Japanese tourism and how much they earn. However, as the cruise ship departed, bad news arrived, shattering the dreams of hundreds of Chinese passengers hoping to visit Miyako Islands. The ship merely passed by its shores, without docking or allowing any passenger to disembark. So, what happened? This ban was part of China's very strong reaction to Japan's new Prime Minister, Sanai Takaichi, who, in the eyes of the Chinese, committed a major sin when she stated in Parliament on November 7th that the use of military force against Taiwan would constitute an existential threat to Japan. Of course, this isn't just a casual remark, but a statement from the Prime Minister of Asia's second most powerful nation, carrying immense legal consequences. Not a single Japanese Prime Minister has dared to utter those words for decades. Ever since, and throughout these last 3 weeks, the Chinese and Japanese have been trading blows with harsh statements, punitive actions, military skirmishes, and a constant escalation. And neither of the two sides is willing to back down, to the point where even Trump had to step in to mediate between the two. We're discussing one of the most significant crises that has occurred between China and Japan throughout their long history, which is full of tensions and wars. A global crisis is escalating between the two Asian giants who have been clashing for several weeks now. Why did the new Prime Minister of Japan confront China, and the Chinese took harsh measures against the Japanese? Could these two countries go to war in the future? And how is China testing America with what's happening? These are some questions I'll answer in today's episode. Just about a month ago, last October, when Sanai Takahashi won the leadership of the ruling Liberal Democratic Party and consequently became Japan's prime minister, China was prepared for the tension coming its way, as if it had a premonition. But the truth is, for the Chinese, the message was clear from the very beginning, because we're talking about the distinguished protege of the late, renowned Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, who was a hawk among the hardline Japanese ultranationalists, anti-China on virtually every front. The reality is that the relationship between China and Japan, who are the two dominant political and cultural powers in Northeast Asia, is one of the most sensitive international relationships in the entire world. The Chinese and Japanese are treading a very fine line, as the saying goes. There's a very delicate balance between them, with a long, tense history, full of wars and casualties. That's why if any hope emerges, a change in the leadership of both countries, or an external shock from another regional or global power, or a change in the status quo happens, this delicate balance is easily severed, and the two nations fall into conflict. And this is precisely what occurred. Following Tsai's election, the Chinese immediately conveyed a clear message of disdain towards her when Chinese President Xi Jinping broke diplomatic traditions on one of the rare occasions, and did not dispatch a congratulatory message to her for her victory as prime minister. Despite that, the Japanese insisted on holding a direct meeting between Sanai and Xie. This meeting actually took place at the APEC Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Summit in South Korea on October 31st. This was also the conference that Trump attended, and where he also met the Chinese president. In this meeting, the Chinese president was very clear and spoke with her about Taiwan. He made a very important statement, that the relationship between China and Japan should not be defined by problems. So, in essence, he's telling her, you Japanese, you have no business with Taiwan, and let's maintain our good relationship. The meeting proceeded without any problems whatsoever, and everything seemed fine. But that lasted for less than 24 hours. Why? Because the very next day, Japan's prime minister met with Taiwan's representative at APEC. Not only that, she published a photo of their meeting, expressing her wish to deepen cooperation between Japan and Taiwan. Of course, the Chinese strongly protested this interview because, as we all know, China considers any official contact with Taiwan to be a hostile act against China's official policy, which considers Taiwan an integral part of mainland China. Following this interview, Sanai did not retreat a single step. Instead, she declared in Parliament that should military force be employed in the Taiwan conflict, including the deployment of naval vessels, this could be considered a circumstance that threatens Japan's very existence. So why did her parliamentary statement provoke such intense anger from the Chinese? Because her statement would give her legal justification for military intervention if China executed its long-standing plans and invaded Taiwan. Look, folks, the Constitution of Japan is one of the most unique constitutions globally, and it's one America helped draft, especially its military section, after striking Japan with 2 nuclear bombs at the end of World War II and bringing it to its knees. This peaceful constitution had among its core principles a defensive policy, which Japan named Senshu Bo-e, meaning defense and defense only. This is a clear policy stating that Japan will not possess any military capabilities beyond what is necessary to repel a limited attack on its own territory. And thank you for that. What's important is, 10 years ago, in 2015, Japan adopted a law which reinterpreted its constitution to permit the use of armed force for collective self-defense in specific limited cases, including any situation that explicitly threatens Japan's very survival, as stated. I've spoken to you before, in great detail, about the tremendous transformation taking place in the Japanese military these years, under American sponsorship. You absolutely must watch that very important episode that's currently visible to you. Throughout all the past years, every Japanese government has consistently avoided defining a specific scenario that could be called a threat to Japan's very existence. That is, until Sanai came, who, within a few days of taking power, did what no Japanese prime minister had done before, and openly stated that the Japanese army could very well intervene in the event of a Taiwan invasion. Of course, this possibility has been discussed many times internally among the Japanese, but this is the first time Japan's top leader has said it so directly, and the Chinese are not threatening at all on this Taiwan issue, and the whole world knows it. One of the very first, immediate, and quite strong reactions was from Qui Jian, the consul general for China in the western Japanese city of Osaka, who took to Platform X and stated that Japan's position, considering any emergency situation in Taiwan a direct threat to its own survival, is a truly fatal course. He was chosen by foolish politicians, and he didn't stop there. Instead, he escalated his tone, threw diplomacy aside, and continued to say what you see before you. And of course, this statement has nothing to do with diplomacy, as is clear. However, the post was quickly deleted, and no one from the Chinese consulate in Osaka commented on what happened. Despite this, Jiang's words can be considered a mild reaction compared to what China did later. China, my friends, was not to be underestimated. And the very first sector where it sank its teeth was the tourism industry, one of its enormous strategic advantages against Japan. Now pay very close attention here. Chinese tourists represent a full quarter of Japan's annual visitors, and they are the highest spenders among all international tourists. Chinese tourists, each individual spends between $1,500 and $2,000 per single trip to Japan. Immediately after Sanai delivered her statement in Parliament, the Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs issued a warning to its citizens against traveling to Japan anytime soon, and some state-owned companies and a number of major banks issued directives to their employees prohibiting travel to Japan. This point is important because a significant number of these companies and banks usually keep their employees' passports to prevent them from violating government directives in any area, like traveling secretly, for example. This situation led to the cancellation of tens of thousands of flight and hotel bookings by Chinese travelers for over 430,000 flights from China to Japan. These cancellations were part of 1.4 million flights originally scheduled through this December, according to data from the Chinese trading office, China Trading Desk. This is a research company specializing in tracking travel and tourism data. Subramaniapad, the company's CEO, states that this staggering figure means roughly $500 million have already been wiped from the Japanese tourism sector's profits. This is based on Chinese tourists spending approximately $900 million monthly in Japan. If these cancellations and travel reluctance persist until year end, whether due to government directives or Chinese initiatives, Japan stands to lose $1 to $2 billion. This figure, incidentally, could reach $9 billion if tensions persist into 2026, and there are estimates that raise this figure up to $14 billion. A large part of this loss is due to Chinese tourists, who are the main drivers of Japan's retail sector, exploiting the weak Japanese yen and purchasing millions of luxury goods. And since China has used tourism as a weapon to pressure the Japanese, anyway, under this Chinese pressure, many Japanese firms have already seen their stock value decline, like the cosmetics company Shiseido and Pan Pacific International Holdings, along with two Mitsubishi Holdings, which manage some of the most important luxury goods store chains in Japan, and Oriental Land, which manages the Disney Resort in Tokyo, and other various companies. In addition to tourism, China took a bigger step and postponed the Beijing-Tokyo Forum, a very important annual meeting held between researchers from both countries in different fields. This year, China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi himself was scheduled to deliver a speech there. This is the first time the forum has been postponed since its launch 20 years ago in 2005. Not a single year was postponed, not even during the severe tension between Japan and China in 2012. China wasn't content with just that. It also suspended the annual tours for its prospective students, which take place at Japanese universities before the academic year begins. And based on these, they decide exactly where in Japan they will study. This is important when we consider that in 2024, 124,000 Chinese students have studied or are currently studying in Japan. This number represents about 37% of all foreign students enrolled in Japanese universities. It also means tens of millions of dollars lost to the Japanese economy if this suspension continues. This is besides China's ban on Japanese seafood imports and the cancellation of many Japanese artists' concerts on Chinese soil. In addition to these economic and cultural sanctions, China also pursued two other paths, one political, the other military. Politically, China last Friday, November 21st, delivered a strongly worded official message to the Secretary General of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres, and distributed it to all members of the organization. It declared that should Japan dare to intervene militarily in the Taiwan Strait, this would constitute an act of aggression, whereby China would exercise its inherent right to self-defense in accordance with the United Nations Charter and international law. Of course, Japan didn't stay silent and immediately responded with a message through its representative, stating that China's claims contradict the facts on the ground and are baseless. On the military front, China intensified its military naval patrols near the islands north of Taiwan. These are the uninhabited islands in the East China Sea, known as Senkaku in Japan and Diaoyu in China, over whose administration the two countries have been disputing for many long years. Normally, since 2012, China has been sending Coast Guard patrols almost daily there, but this time, with this escalation, the number of ships increased and intensified its patrols generally. All of this is under the watchful eyes of the Japanese Navy, which is monitoring the scene from a distance. On the other hand, Japan has not remained silent and continues its plans to deploy Chusam medium-range surface-to-air missiles at the Yonaguni base, south of Japanese territory, which is close to Taiwan. This base was visited by Japanese Defense Minister Shinjiro Koizumi last Sunday, where he told reporters that Japan's missile deployment plans remain unchanged and are on track for execution. Although the missile's range is short and poses no threat to Chinese territory, it does pose a threat to any Chinese military assets should China actually invade Taiwan, as I told you, due to the base's extreme proximity to Taiwan. Given this mutual escalation, and with the Japanese economy not in its best condition, especially after the Tokyo Stock Exchange lost $127 billion last week from the value of its listed companies' shares, two very important questions remain for us. Is either side willing to back down? And what will America do in light of these developments, especially with Trump's strong desire to preserve the uneasy truce between himself and the Chinese? Listen, folks, if there's one side that will back down in this game of chicken, It will be Japan, without a doubt. And this is because China possesses a great many powerful leverage points, chief among them the Japanese presence within the Chinese market, and the dependence of a large number of Japanese firms on the largest market in all of Asia, and the second largest global market after the United States. But up to this point, neither side has clearly backed down in front of the other. China wants the Japanese Prime Minister to clearly and directly retract her statements, and Japan has completely refused to do so. This is despite her telling Parliament just a few days ago that she had learned her lesson and wouldn't specify clearly again. The situation where Japan would act as if there was an existential threat against it, that was Trump. And because he was very keen on maintaining a calm front with China, through the truce he brokered with the Chinese president, this came after long months of exchanging blows between Washington and Beijing since the start of the year, through the tariff war, export controls, and more. He called the Chinese president, and then he posted on his Truth Social platform that he had a very good conversation with him about Ukraine and the trade agreement he had made with him in South Korea. Why is this statement important? Because Trump completely avoided mentioning Taiwan. And in my opinion, this is a complete disregard for the Japanese desire for a public endorsement from the American ally, for the direction of the Prime Minister who comes from a nationalist background and praises the Japan-America alliance almost everywhere. I want to tell you that companies have so far offered Trump investment promises and agreements worth hundreds of billions of dollars. And if I told you they're handing Japan to Trump on a golden platter, I wouldn't be exaggerating at all. Anyway, after Trump had spoken to Xi, he then contacted the Japanese Prime Minister, but he made no public mention of this particular conversation. However, sources later revealed that Trump had emphasized during their discussion the profound strength of the US-Japan alliance and assured her she was among his closest allies and that she could reach out to him personally at any moment. You might be surprised by this information. However, this industrial trend enjoys popular and political support. Generally, the Japanese have leaned towards a nationalist mood in recent years. This is natural given the spread of the nationalist right-wing wave almost globally. Over the last decade and a half, this indicates that a large percentage of them endorse the Prime Minister's direction against China. This is further supported by opinion polls, which clearly show her approval rating is nearing 70%. At the same time, the unspoken Japanese government policy always views China as a huge and imminent military threat on its borders, especially with the tremendous growth of China's military and economic power in recent years, coupled with the expansion of its missile and nuclear arsenal, against an undeclared American veto that prevents Japan and South Korea from possessing nuclear weapons. And if America starts to gradually give Japan military freedom, as we said, all this makes China's clear retreat from its statements, as China wants, severely harm it internally, both popularly and governmentally. Meanwhile, China views these statements as a golden opportunity, on the one hand, to exert pressure on the new prime minister during her first months in power, and to obstruct her national agenda focused on building the army, increasing the defense budget, purchasing American weapons, and positioning this army as a regional proxy force against China. On the other hand, this is an opportunity for China to test the strength of the US-Japan alliance. In other words, China wants to see what Trump's America will do. Will it intervene with its full weight in favor of Japan and strengthen its regional alliances? Will Trump maintain relative calm with China, now and in the future? Currently, it's very clear that Trump and his administration don't want any disruption to this relative US-China calm, especially since confrontations between the world's two largest economies over the past months have proven that China now possesses immense leverage that could harm America. And this is a new global situation for America, which needs economic stability to know how to deal with it in the future. I don't want to prolong this. Let me know in the following your responses in the comments section. Finally, if you like this episode, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And most importantly, tell your friends and loved ones about us so they can benefit. Peace.